Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Walcavage. We're back for another edition of Thyroid Answers Podcast, and this is another one of the Q&A episodes, and we have back the functional nurse practitioner, Tara Quintana. Tara, welcome back to the Thyroid Answers Podcast Q&As. How are you doing today?
Always a pleasure, Eric. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
All right. Well, we're back for more question and answer. So far, we've got a number of these we've done already. We're getting good response back from the people as they're listening to them. I saw a couple things came into me like, love these. Keep doing these, please. So we're doing more because Tara's got more questions. So let's get right into it. Let's go with the next question on the list and let's see if we can get answered.
Okay. Can a history of dieting or an eating disorder impact thyroid function long term? And how can I address this from a holistic perspective?
Wow. So can it affect? So the answer, like the simple answer is yes. If you have long-term calorie restriction, it is going to have an impact, really what we call the set point of your metabolism, for sure. It can have that. That's been in the literature. Probably in the last week, I read a couple of papers on the fasting and the different length of fasting and impact it has on thyroid physiology. Now, does that mean you can't ever get it reset? No, I don't think it necessarily means that, but definitely for people who are doing chronic restriction of calories, you're going to have a downregulation of your metabolism. That's just to be anticipated. And I think to some degree, we have to interpret your labs when we're looking at them based on what you're doing. And I've had a number of patients who like to do or overweight and are like, hey, I'm going to do 3-day fasts every week to try and lose weight. Okay, you can do that, but it is going to have an impact on your thyroid physiology. So what are you trying to address? And you might be creating problems. Now, usually I can talk them into a better strategy over time, but it can create some pretty significant challenges. So, yeah, I think the answer is yes. Did I answer the question?
You did, about that and how to address it from a holistic perspective.
Yeah, so I think we have to address a couple things. If you've got and I think the other part of that, like if somebody had an eating disorder, right? Foundationally, we have to address a neuro-emotional component around that. What's driving the eating disorder, right? That becomes key component. If we don't address the why they do these things, it's usually got a neuro-emotional component to it. Nothing's probably going to change. But we have to address that piece of it. If somebody's on thyroid medication and they have that type of situation going on, and they're trying to optimize their T3 with T3 medication, not considering that their TSH and T3, reverse T3, may be out of range because of their eating disorder, and trying to manipulate them into a optimal range when they have this neuro-emotional stress response going on, it's not going to pan out well for the individual and actually may create more anxiousness, more anxiety, more problems. So how do you address it naturally? I think what we have to do is get to the root, and what we talk about almost every one of these Q&As is, what are the factors that are driving the individual who's having whatever that eating disorder is to behave like that? And how do we address the things that are triggering that? That's foundationally is what I think we need to do, and not over-medicate them to try and find a predetermined optimal range. That too becomes one of the things we need to consider. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I'm glad you touched on the component of the brain and the thought process and the significance of someone that's suffering or has suffered with an eating disorder, and the need to address the root causes for that. And above all else, I think a takeaway message for me is that no matter what's happened, whatever we've been through, we're never hopeless. Whatever changes with physiology that may have occurred, I do believe that we can heal. It's for some, it might be a longer journey, or it may require thinking of things more like broadly. So not just the dose of a medication if somebody has hypothyroidism, but how the body is able to receive that dose, process it, and like you've mentioned so many times before, and have stolen some of your lines, I hope that's okay, with my patients, about the load on the body, and that itself is adding to the load and the way that we feel about what we've overcome. If we've in fact moved through that and overcome the eating disorder, like what our feeling about that is. Because if we believe there's, we're broken, that there's something wrong with us, there will be, I believe there will be issues. We're going to have issues because we have to be in it, right? We have to be fully in it. We talked about this before we started recording. We have to be in it and believe it and be willing to comprehend and do the work, which likely includes inner work. That's kind of what
yeah. Well, I think the body and the human machine is amazing what it can accomplish, and most of us don't get out of it what it can do. But with the right mindset and the right processes, and we do the right things, we can accomplish so much more than most people think they can. But we also, if I believe I'm going to be sick and ill, I'm probably going to be sick and ill. If I think I can recover and I put the right strategies in place, I probably have a better chance of recovering. If I think I can be healthy and be well, but don't put the strategies in place to get healthier, right, to improve my physiology, then all the belief in the world may not change anything. So you really need the right thought process and the appropriate actions to improve your health and well-being. And if you do both of those things, man, there's a lot to do. And the best thing to do is, a lot of times you can push that towards athletics, right? When somebody says, hey, there's no way I could run a marathon. Well, you could. Like, we could pull somebody off the street, and if they are willing to say, I think I could, maybe I can do it, right? And we give them the right training, absolutely they can run a marathon in under 12 weeks. Absolutely. But if they're like, nope, there's no way I'm going to be able to do it, they don't have the right mindset, but we put the actions in place, they may quit mentally, emotionally in that race, even though they've had the appropriate training. So we really need both of those, the right mindset and the right actions to do whatever we want and be successful in life. And a lot of times we don't have those two things going together. All right, let's go number 2.
Okay, this one is you touched on it a little bit, but I think they want a little bit more information about it. Can intermittent fasting or other dietary timing strategies impact thyroid function and symptom management?
Yeah, it can, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should go through extended fasting or nobody should go through extended fasting. I think as a species, I think we're adaptive to longer periods of time without eating. I think the body has the ability to do that. I don't think, we didn't have clocks when we were, early man and woman, like, oh, it's 8:30, I got to eat breakfast, right? So we have the system that's set up to go through periods of time of feast and periods of time of famine and adapt. And that's why we have the ability to restore calories as adipose tissue. So that way we can store glucose, we can store fats, we can store excess calories for when we really need them. And So I think we can do it. The challenge becomes, I think for a lot of things is, what's the state of the individual as they're going through it, right? Are they in a state where they have the ability, do they have other immune, inflammatory, are they have other systems that are already broken that's going to prevent that from them being successful in their strategy? And what's their resilience in the moment? Like if you're like, hey, I'm going to try an 18-hour fast, and you're used to eating like every 2 hours, your physiology is going to need some adaptation. So I think it's, I think fasting's great. I think it can have an impact on your health and well-being, pros or cons. It's going to definitely have an impact on your blood labs. So if you're doing fasting, you really need to consider, if I'm going to do labs, when am I doing those labs? How long was the fast prior to those labs? What's the impact on, let's say, the thyroid panel? Like if you're doing extended fast and you're on an 24-hour fast or 18-hour fast, you shouldn't, and you see an elevated TSH and a reduced T3, that doesn't necessarily mean you need more T3 or more T4 or any thyroid replacement. We just have to consider that might be the result of a fasted state. It's an appropriate adaptive response to a fasted state. So we have to interpret all the things that we're assessing with how we're doing our fast, what that fast look like, the duration of the fast, not just get our labs done and not take those things into consideration. I think I answered the question. I may have gone off on a tangent there. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely answered the question. And like you said, it depends, right? It depends on the individual. And I'm not usually, I think I can safely say I'm never an all or none individual, where maybe one intermittent fasting day a week or two, or for this week is okay, and next week maybe it isn't. It depends on the situation. Depending on the length of time, it is a stressor, right? It's a stressor on the body, like you mentioned. So that may be beneficial and it may not. And we also have to factor in how long of a fast, if that's what somebody's really getting at, like, should I do a 36-hour fast every 2 weeks or once a month, like whatever, then is my body getting all of the nutrients that it needs for the thyroid to function properly? And maybe it could be beneficial for somebody if they're eating every 2 hours and never giving their body a break, that they might feel more energized at some point if they did timing, like changes to their timing. But I don't think anybody can just say across the board, yeah, do this and you'll be perfect, because everybody's different.
Yeah, and everybody's in a different place. I mean, sometimes we hear about this, and I know, I've got some colleagues that talk about this, even from women and their hormone cycle, when you should fast, when you shouldn't fast. Yeah, maybe, but I don't even think that is across the board appropriate. Like we can even say it that way, because and I'm sure you have too. There's people that are take care of females all the time, right? And they're fasting at different phases of their cycle, and they seem to do fine. I think it really depends on the individual and everything else that's going on. So if you want to do some intermittent fasting, I do a lot of intermittent fasting. I typically don't, many days, like 4 or 5 days out of the week, I probably don't eat till noon, 1 o'clock. But if I didn't feel well, I would eat, right? If I had real hunger cues, I would eat. But if you're a person who says, hey, all my girlfriends are doing 18-hour fast, so I want to do one too, and I don't feel well when I do it, you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that I do it? Well, if you don't feel well when you're doing it, you probably have some other issues that need to be addressed, because you're not regulating your glucose well. You're not very resilient at breaking up those fat reserves and getting them to the cells and tissues and converting them into cellular energy. So if you if you want to do some if you do intermittent fasting and you feel good, great. If somebody says, well, you can't do it or shouldn't do it because it's this time of the month, if you feel good, who cares, right? So I think it's on an individual basis, but as a foundational tool for me, I don't think we were built as a species to eat by clock, eat by the meal time that it's supposed to be. I think if we should have, and this gets skewed a little bit as we have more chronic illness, is that we do have some signaling mechanisms in that should be, when working appropriately, really let us know, hey, these are hunger cues. I need to consume something, or otherwise, a lot of times, hey, we're eating because of the time of the day or the clock, or because everybody else is eating. And a lot of times we don't really need those resources coming in. So I think we have to be a bit more intuitive about it, but I don't see any downside to doing it. And I think I think we've been doing this since came on planet Earth. We've been doing intermittent fasting. So I don't see where it should be construed as a potential problem for anybody if it's done with a little bit of thought process.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the menstrual cycle timing also. I think there was a hormone question in here somewhere with regards to that. But yeah, we need to know what we feel, what our experience is, and be in touch with that to see, like, is this beneficial? If somebody's drastically reducing or whatever it is somebody's doing and they don't feel well, we need to think about why, and maybe that's not the best option right then. And I also wouldn't say, if this didn't work for me this day, then next month I'm not going to do it either, because maybe next month it'll be different. Right. And it has to do with, our bodies are very complex and there's a lot of moving parts. And I don't believe in, the word protocol just really, it gets under my skin. Like, for things like this, like every single person should do this. But I do agree, I don't believe we've evolved to just be stuffing our face every second of the day. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And if somebody's needing to do that, we need to figure out what's going on with their bodies and their brain for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Right. What we got next?
Okay. How does circadian rhythm disruption affect thyroid health, and what lifestyle changes can help align my biological clock?
So thyroid hormones are released kind of on that kind of circadian rhythm. So if there is literature out there that shows that, just changing like our shift work time in the day, how we work, how we behave, especially with we're having rapid changes in our sleep wake cycles, that can have a shift in hormones overall. I do think that once somebody gets set in a set pattern, they can still regulate themselves fairly well, even though it goes against what we might consider for the general population, their normal circadian rhythms. But I think if you're having a lot of dysregulation on a consistent basis of your sleep and wake cycles, you're disrupting that circadian rhythm on a constant basis, unless you're really at a higher state of health, it's probably going to have a more negative impact. So if it's periodic, we all do that periodically, right? Like, right. And you were like, oh, that didn't, I need a day or two to recover. If that becomes the normal pattern, I think we're okay, right? Because now the body says, okay, this is our new pattern, and I think we can get some shift. But if it's periodic and you're like, all right, I'm going to be up till 2 this night, and then I got to bed at the next night I'm at 11, and then I'm going to stay up all night. And I think that over time, we do better as a species. We do better with sex hormone regulation, thyroid hormone regulation, if we have more set patterns that match the natural circadian rhythms of the body.
Yeah, I love thinking about circadian rhythm. I used to work night shift back in the day when I first started in healthcare, and I thought the best thing for my body was to switch back and forth. So I would go days in a row of being awake at night, and then I would switch it. So and I didn't do this by getting more sleep. I did it by getting less. So I would work all night long, stay up, you know, all day, and then try to go to bed. And so I ended up losing out on like 2 days a week. And I don't think that that's the most beneficial. If anything, like you said, our bodies will adapt. And if we stay in the same rhythm. So I definitely think consistency is really important. I feel like it's been really an instrumental component for me on my health journey with everything that I've been through, because I wasn't paying enough attention to what my body needed. Instead, I was living by a clock, right?
Yeah.
Like I need to be up at this time, or like if I stay up too late, we're designed to adapt without a doubt. So if it's something that somebody feels is a problem, because then they're asking for what lifestyle changes can we do to realign consistency.
Yeah.
So for me, if I fall off the wagon, as I tell my patients, with staying up too late because can't turn this off, right? For me, that's like one of my biggest challenges. If I'm working on something, a project, and I don't want to stop, right? And so I push myself too hard, I can feel it the next day. I love tracking devices too, because it helps me to have more balance, where I think about, let's try to ease in the next 5 days. So if I've stayed up too late, I feel a little bit off the next day, maybe I feel something even with my gut, then I'm not going to keep pushing, because it's just more stress on the body. And just think about, how can I get back to a rhythm, right? Or if somebody's looking, if they are trying to realign with the sun, let's say, if there's studies out there showing, you know, if you sleep outside, like in a camp for a few days in a row, not inside of like a camper, but under the stars, that the body will naturally come back into rhythm. I haven't tried that personally. When I camp, I'm inside in a
The glamping, they call it.
I'm glamping when I'm camping, but it's an interesting concept, and it makes a lot of sense. But that's could be somewhat extreme, an extreme thing. Like that might have been beneficial for me when then I switched to working days. That was a much rougher transition. After 9 months or 10 months of working nights and switching back and forth, it took me months to feel aligned.
Yeah. I mean, when I started working right out of college, I was working night shift as well. It was like 10-hour, I think it was 10-hour shifts. So it was the rotate, like you were on one day, off one day, on 3 days, off a day, on 5 days, off 3 days. Like it was kind of a weird schedule. And I tried to do what you tried to do. Like, okay, I'll just hang I'll just, for that one day, I'll just try and stay up all day and hang out with everybody, because you want it, because all the normal people are like working during the day, and you want to go, you know, socialize with them. And if you're working night shift, you're coming home and you're sleeping while everybody else is up. And then when you're getting up, everybody else is kind of winding it down. So you do want to get back into a normal, like that routine. But I quickly found that was not good for me. And so one of the things, unless I had like an extended 5 day, I might switch my routine. Like, so during that 5 day span, I might try and and hang the one day. So then get back to 3-4 days of like a daytime rhythm. But if I only had 1 to 3 days, I would really just kind of stick on my normal night shift sleep schedule. Because it was just too rough. Because you then when you go back to that night shift, your brain is like, okay, it's time to go to bed, and now you're pumping caffeine into the system, and you're drinking caffeine, and you're drinking way too much caffeine to try and stay awake during the shift, and then you come home and you're exhausted and you can maybe fall asleep, but then you can't stay asleep. You're constantly distracted. You're not getting into deep sleep. And then it just creates a problem. I think that once I realized that was trying to live on a dual schedule, realized how I did not feel and function well. And I made the commitment to just kind of be a night shifter. I think my health was a lot better. And then once I went back to day shift, I was like, okay, this is even better, because living this night shift just didn't work out well for me. But all right, let's go to the next one.
You're very wise.
Yeah.
How do I know if I'm on the appropriate dose of thyroid medication?
I guess it depends on who you're asking that question. I'm guessing since they're asking us the question, we're going to take it from, I'll give you my take and then you can add in. So it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Okay. So for me, when I'm working with somebody, I want to ask them that question right out the gate. Like, what is your goal with your thyroid physiology? What are you trying to accomplish? If their goal is to find, like, I just want to know what dose of T4 and T3 I need to take, my next question would be to do what? Well, just so I know what I'm supposed to take, but to do what? Well, so that my labs are in the optimal range. Okay. Well, then you're going to be manipulating that back and forth based on what's going on with life, because you think that a T3 needs to be in X range, should never shift in or out of that. You think T4 should be in a set range and should never shift out of that. And you think that TSH should be in a set range and never shift out of that. And regardless of whether you're looking at lab reference ranges or optimal ranges, lab values are dynamic, right? So what we don't want to do is try and manage a number into this set rigid range. We want to be able to, when we're trying to help somebody determine what's the right dose, we want the dose in my opinion, we want the dose to match potentially the glandular dysfunction, but not overwhelm it. So what does that mean? So if the goal is for you to potentially recover thyroid gland function and it have improved conversion, you can't over medicate, because if you're taking more medication than you should, it suppresses TSH, which then prevents the thyroid gland from ever having a chance to recover. If you take too much thyroid medication, then you suppress conversion and you start to affect the peripheral piece of it. So how does somebody determine the appropriate dose? Again, is based on what you want to do. I just want to manage the numbers. Okay, well, that's going to be based on every time you go for the lab, somebody's going to try and tweak that. If you want to know what's the appropriate dose, in general, it's the least amount of thyroid hormone that you can take that makes you feel and function optimally. That's the appropriate dose. And that may change. So in my world, as I'm working with people, I'm always, if their goal is to improve their health and quality of life and potentially help the thyroid gland restore, then I want them on the least amount of T4 as possible. If there's somebody like you who's had thyroidectomy or radioactive treatment, then I know they're going to need some T3. And so I may want to get them at a baseline of maybe 5 or 10 micrograms of T3, because I want to replace what a healthy thyroid gland would have made in general. And that's not always the case, because if I have somebody who's got chronic illness, chronic inflammation, their normal physiology would downregulate thyroid hormone production naturally. So they'd have a lower TSH because of that inflammatory mechanism that might suppress T4 and T3 to some degree. So I don't necessarily want to get them, but that, to me, that would be a starting point of somebody who had thyroidectomy. Is like, okay, get us back to where the gland is, and then we can titrate it from up or down based on gut issues, up or down based on their state of overall physiology. And I would look at their full thyroid panel and tissue markers to determine if I'm in the right ballpark along with their signs and symptoms. For the person who has a thyroid gland and they're trying to restore function, then I prefer that they're just on T4. And I know that creates a lot of chaos for people who are like, the thyroid gland makes T3 too. Yes, it does. But T3 is easily going to get into the pituitary tissue and potentially suppress TSH. And I don't want to do that if I don't need to do it. So what I want to see for the person who still has a thyroid gland and the thyroid gland only makes 5 to 10 micrograms. And we know that under stress conditions, the hypothalamus pituitary can kind of be way more sensitive to thyroid hormone. I want them on T4 only. And I totally understand they're going to have a reduced conversion of T4 to T3. And so I'm not trying to manipulate that T3 levels. When I'm trying to, with the medication, I want to see if the diet, lifestyle, supplementation strategies to fix and address the root issues, as I'm working on that, then I can start to see the shift in T4 to T3 conversion. So I guess to summarize that, if it's a person who is trying to restore their function, their normal function, and their goal is to have their thyroid gland recover, then I want them on the least amount of thyroid hormone. And I will look at that free T3 to free T4 ratio if they're on T4 only. And I'll look at the rest of their labs to say, all right, is this a person I don't have enough thyroid hormone in the system, or is this a person there's enough in the system for their state, and therefore I don't want them taking more. And so the free T3 to free T4 ratio to a large degree, along with looking at the tissue markers, helps me determine what's the appropriate state. I'm not trying to suppress TSH into the 1 to 2 range in those cases. As a matter of fact, many times I don't want them in the 1 to 2 range for TSH. But if the free T3 to free T4 ratio on their dose of T4 is low and the reverse T3 is up, then and their TSH is in that 1 to 2 range, I don't want them on that much. I want them on less. I actually want to see them start to become closer to that 0.31 to 0.34 range naturally. If I see that on the dose they're on, they're above that 0.34 and their T3 is low and their reverse T3 is low, and maybe the T4 is relatively low, then I know that they need a stronger dose, at least temporarily. But for me, that would be the way. If you're on a dose of medication, I don't care what it is. If it's Synthroid, levothyroxine, Armour, NP thyroid, Voxel, I don't care what it is. If you're on it, you feel good, you function good, you're at the a more appropriate weight, you got plenty of energy, you're probably on the right dose. Even if your TSH is a little bit high, right? Even if your free T3 is outside the optimal range, you're probably on the right dose. But if your TSH is normal, T4 has been pushed in the range, T3 is in the appropriate range, but you still have reduced free T3 to free T4 ratio, you have signs and symptoms, you have glucose resistance, you have elevated lipids, you have a reduced cortisol production, that what you're doing is not appropriate, right? That is not the appropriate dose, okay? And so it's a complex answer, but that's why people just default to, let me just manage TSH.
Well, I thought it's a very interesting question, and it's a loaded question, like you said at the beginning, because it depends on who you're asking about this for how to know. When you talking about recovering the thyroid function, the conventional medicine model works really great for acute care issues, like in acute, like I have a heart attack, I have a stroke, something like that, or you have an injury. But the model doesn't really look for balance, like that we actually can recover and heal. So I don't think a lot of just people know that if we just suppress our own hormone production with whatever hormones we're using, right, it will cause some type of a suppression of us to make them, our bodies to make them naturally, then that can absolutely impede the body from healing. So yeah, what is somebody's goal? And for some individuals, and I've met some of these individuals, they just want to know what to take, the perfect dose for, I've heard for this weight and for that. There's so many variables that matter. So like you, I want to know more information. I definitely believe in a full thyroid panel and looking at other hormones too, and evaluating that individual and where they are right now, what they're going through right now, because doses, they oftentimes need to change because somebody will be on one. Like I had somebody recently say, I felt so great for 2 months. It was perfect. And then I feel like garbage again. So what dose do I take now? First thing I'm going to ask is, what's been going on in the past couple of months in your life? Like what's the rest of the picture? Because if they have a gland or not, right? I think that's going to be vitally important. If somebody doesn't have a gland, like me, I care more about how they feel than what a lab value says any day of the week. And I might disagree with you if somebody has a gland with not considering T3. It would depend. It would depend on the rest of the circumstances, because we've talked about my decreased genetic capability of converting. I do a lot of genetic testing, and a lot of people have this. It's not like it doesn't work at all. So it's still going to function to some ability, but I want to know more information. I don't believe in just, this is for anything, that this is just do this and you're good forever. And ratios, I definitely appreciate the ratios. And I think somebody needs to really think about overall, like signs and symptoms for the thyroid, but overall, how are they sleeping? Has anything shifted with nutrition? Because those things are going to matter, and they're going to impact, because it can be a stressor. So going back to the previous question a couple ago, if somebody's starting a significant fasting routine that they've never done before, throws off all of their numbers and they don't feel good, or maybe they feel better. My answer is always, it depends.
Yeah. So I think with the T3 piece, like I'm not opposed to somebody taking T3. My opposition to somebody taking T3, when we're trying to figure out and use labs to help direct dosages, the T3 makes it messy. So how many hours is it since we took the T3 dose? What type of T3 was it? Because that's going to influence the lab value. And let's say you're taking T3 and you took your last dose 24 hours before the labs, then you're taking that. Half-life of T3 is somewhere between 18 to 24 hours. So we got like half of that. So, but 4 hours after they take that thyroid medication dose, they're going to have the peak of their T3. So what are we trying to measure when we're seeing what are we doing with the T3? We may actually have to change when we're measuring labs to see what the actual effect of that thyroid hormone medication is. It just makes it sticky. If you're changing the T3 dose, then that is going to have an effect on the ratios, and that may have an impact. And there's no doubt that T3 can definitely have an impact in changing the chemistry, even if you have a cell stress response come on. Look at the liver. The liver is highly dependent on T3. Yes, it has a deiodinase enzyme, deiodinase 1. It makes some T3 that hangs in the cell for a small amount of time and it goes out of the cell. But most of the T3 that drives liver function is coming from the circulation. The iodinase 1's primary role isn't T4 to T3 conversion. Its primary role is the metabolism of reverse T3 and T3. So it is important. We can make changes there by giving it, but to some degree, it can influence what we're looking at on those patterns. Like, lipids went down, so this must be that we restored global T4 to T3 conversion. Not so fast. The liver's utilizing T4 a lot differently than, say, another tissue that really gets some T3 from the bloodstream and some T3 from T4 to T3 conversion inside the cell versus via deiodanase 2. So it can get sticky, but I'm not opposed to it. If I had somebody who they said, hey, I just feel better, and if I've been hypothyroid for 30 years and I've been on T4 and T3, great. I would still want to bring them back to a level of T3 that would be appropriate for a thyroid gland to be making, not an inappropriate amount. So example is somebody who maybe was doing 2 grains of Armour, right? So maybe they're taking 2 grains or more of Armour. That would put them at a higher level of T3 than their thyroid gland would normally make. And so I personally wouldn't want them to do that. I would want them to be on separate T4 and T3 if they're going to do that. So that way, when we change the medication dose, we're not changing both things at the same time. Hey, we're going to keep you on some T3. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10 micrograms. I have patients because that's closer to matching what their thyroid gland may actually make. And then when we need to change T4 and potentially T3, we can do them independently versus just saying, okay, we're going to take you from 2.5 grains of Armour to 2 grains. That person's probably going to see a bigger drop off in how they feel because we've eliminated both T4 and T3 at the same time. So my issue with T3 isn't that I don't think some people can benefit from use it. We do know that if they have deiodanase 2 polymorphisms, they can have up to a 20% drop in their conversion. But I do think some people take that as, oh, well, then they've lost capacity versus they have reduced capacity. Even in the worst, from what I've seen, the worst polymorphisms, if it's homozygous deiodanase 2 polymorphism, the worst it is a 20% drop off in normal conversion. And I think it's just thrown out there. Well, you probably have a polymorphism, take it. But I'm not opposed to it, but I think it's just cleaner. I'm working with a group right now, and we've got a process in place, and we want to be able to monitor people and their metrics. And we want them to be really the people that for the study, we really want them to be on T4 only, not because we only believe that T4 only is good, but because it's a cleaner way to really review the chemistry and say, hey, there's only one variable that we're really monitoring here, which is the T4 dosage versus the T4, the T3, how it's impacting individual cells. My take, but
that's a really great point that you made, actually. And I love that you spoke about having them separated, the T4 and the T3. That's usually where I go with things, and personally, because as you said, it's sticky or messy, and it does really complicate things, adding in the T3 for so many factors, but absolutely when they're going to take the test. And so many people tell me if they come to me and somebody else is managing their thyroid, then they have their labs done. I always ask, what time, when did you get them done? Were you fasting? Like all of the appropriate questions, or did they tell you not to take it like right before you go, like to gain more insight? And usually, actually, I'll say always, it's probably happens at some point, but not with anybody that's told me. it's never even been considered. Those things are not considered. So yeah, that's a great point.
It's super important for the timing because, and it does matter if you're the person who's prescribing T3 medication, like depending on the type of T3 medication, if it's regular T3 medication, the peak is 4 hours, right? So what are you trying to monitor? Do you want to see them with 24 hours so you can see how low the levels go, how the body's doing with T4 to T3 conversion kind of more naturally, even though there's still some T3 there? Are you trying to see what the peak is 4 hours later? Or are you trying to see where they are maybe closer to 8 hours later because we're going to peak and then we're going to decline over the next 24, till the next dose. So, do you want to see how low it goes? Like, what are you trying to accomplish with it? And then if you're taking a slow release T3, like, okay, so you're taking a slow release T3, what time do you want to measure that person? Because I think the peak is 8 or 9 hours for that peak. So really what you want to know is, okay, where are you? Do you want to see where they're at their peak? Do you want to see them in the trough? Like, what are you really trying to accomplish? So I think that piece becomes really important. But ultimately, I'm not trying to manage necessarily their dose, but I do have some people that are on T3 medication. They need it. They've had thyroidectomies. I typically I'll kind of vary it up. Like this time I want to see how you are without it. This time I want to see you where you are, at this many hours past the dose, so we can see how high it goes, how low it goes, and where we need to change. Like, let's break that dose up based on how you're metabolizing it. And I think there's one other key thing too, like, and I've seen this, that the absorption dose for T4 is not as good as the absorption of T3 from what I've seen. I've seen literature saying that the absorption of T3 is like 90% plus. And I've seen they talk about the absorption for T4 can be somewhere between 60 and 80% of the medication you take is getting absorbed. A lot of that has to do with, diet, with gut function, all those things. So if you think about that and you're taking Armour or NP thyroid, right? And I'm taking this in, what happens to those molecules once that starts to get broken down, right? If I've got a 90% absorption of T3 and maybe only a 60 or 80% absorption of T4, and I'm already starting at a ratio of 4-to-1 with this glandular product, and my body's used to 10-to-1 as a natural balance. What happens when I'm getting 90% of the T3 and I'm getting 70% of the T4? Now that 4-to-1 balance is maybe closer to 3-to-1. And what is that impact having on my physiology? Now I'm getting more T3 into the system, less T4 into the system. How does that impact the chemistry and the labs? What is that doing to the thyroid, hypothalamus, the pituitary, the thyroid gland itself, if you have one? I just think it gets really messier. But at the end of the day, if you feel fantastic on it, I don't care. But I would prefer, if you're going to be on the doses, and especially if you're trying to find an appropriate dose, you're way better off having separate meds than having them together, because you can manipulate each one to find a better set dose. Maybe you have no thyroid gland and your dose is better off at 12.5 because of an absorption thing that gets you about 10 micrograms in the system. There's no way you'd be able to do that and the T4 if you're taking Armour at the same time. But I'm dragging this out, but go ahead.
I love these conversations. I'm totally nerding out over here. Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said. And again, we need to look at the whole picture for everything that we're doing. And if somebody's listening to this, like, oh my goodness, now I really don't. Now I'm more confused, and I have no idea what to do. I always take it back to, how do you feel, right? I don't have a thyroid, so I have to take thyroid medication. If somebody has a thyroid, working, like, to be on as little as possible would be a really great strategy. Working through that with symptoms, and sometimes we get worse before we get better, oftentimes.
Oh, definitely. If you're coming off higher dose T3, you can really have some negative symptoms, and it especially, that's why I don't like people on Armor or MP thyroid if you're trying to wean down the dose, because you're dropping both T3 and T4, and that's not a good scenario, because when you had more T3 in the system, that it really suppresses the gland, and then as you drop it, now the gland hasn't been producing hormone T4 primarily for a while, and now you don't have the T4, and then it's like, oh, so yeah, it gotta be individually based strategy based on what the person's trying to accomplish. But let's get to the next one.
Okay, what are the functional medicine approaches to addressing weight gain associated with hypothyroidism?
I think the weight gain is what everybody wants to address first. And the weight gain is part of the adaptive response, right? I've got a threat response. I'm slowing down metabolism. I'm going to take these extra calories that I don't have the resources to burn and use, or I'm adaptively not putting into a cell because of that stress response. We're going to put those into fat storage that's going to gain weight. So if the issue is that the only issue is the thyroid gland and all the downstream physiology works, then when you put thyroid hormone in, replace what the gland can't make, primarily T4, maybe a little bit of T3, you could start to your weight should start to come off, because that's the only problem. But that's, in my opinion, that's usually not the primary issue, is just the gland. The issue is usually there's some type of inflammatory cell stress mechanism going on first. So you're probably not going to lose weight initially as a result. Yes, you will. If we change your diet, reduce some of the inflammatory foods, some of that stuff, yeah, absolutely, you're probably going to lose some weight. But your real adipose tissue weight, that stored excess fat, that is not going to be the thing that comes back initially. We've got to reduce the immune inflammatory processes. We need to see the improvement of T4 to T3 conversion first, natural conversion, not what you take supplementally, but the natural improvement of T4 to T3 conversion. And then that's going to allow for better mobilization and utilization of fats. If you just throw more thyroid hormone into that system and assume it's going to ramp up appropriate mitochondrial function to be able to burn more fats, you're kidding yourselves. That's not how physiology works. And I think we've said this before. Healthy metabolism works like this. I eat calories, I eat food, and I convert the food to energy. And now I have enough resources for current use. And then I'm starting to store extra calories, right? Because, hey, I don't need all this extra calories. That once we start storing calories in the fat tissue, that sends signals back up to the brain that say, hey, stop eating and increase the metabolism to burn off these reserves back to our baseline. So if you're gaining weight and you're eating like a normal, appropriate diet, or even a little bit of extra caloric intake, and you're putting on weight consistently, you've got a metabolism. It's not a thyroid issue per se. It's an immune cell stress inflammatory mechanism at the heart. And so if we don't address what's driving that, you may optimize your TSH, you may optimize your T4, you may optimize your T3, but you probably won't lose weight. And I've seen, I have a patient I'm working with. She feels and functions so much better, but she started on 200 micrograms of levothyroxine a year ago. And she's been now, I think, over a month, no thyroid medication. Her numbers look fantastic. She was probably never should have been on it to begin with. But she's lost some weight, but probably not as much weight as she once to yet. Now we've got others, we've got hormone dysregulation. There's a lot of things that have gone on in that time frame. But she clearly realizes that I feel and function better. I'm not over medicating anymore. And as she's not over medicating, that over medication was probably one of the biggest factors that was contributing to her slowed metabolism. Because as we had dealt with the lifestyle factors, we can reduce or address those things. But ultimately, the excessive amount of T4 in our system was decreasing the conversion of T4 to T3 in those deiodinase 2 generating cells, which was ultimately creating downregulation of T3. The medication was actually creating a peripheral hypothyroid state, which was slowing down or preventing her weight loss. So yes, her TSH was 0.0. She looked hyperthyroid. She had plenty of T4 in the system. She even had her T3 levels didn't look too bad. Now, why would that be? Because she was taking so much T4 medication that not only that even though she had some decreased T4 to T3 conversion, her deiodinase 1 enzymes now had this, with this high level of T4 in the system, her deiodinase 1 enzymes had to stop doing what their primary job was, which is metabolizing reverse T3 and T3 and start converting rapidly T4 to T3. So one of the things we see, and you've probably seen this too, is that at a certain level of you get the appropriate level of thyroid T4 hormone, and then you start to get into the gray zone, whereas the more you give, the more T3 goes down. And some people, you see this, they're like, wait a minute, it wasn't too bad before, but now every time I get a higher dose of T4, my T3 gets worse. Why is that getting worse? It's because there's too much T4 in circulation that's decreasing the deiodinase 2 enzyme. So we reduce the conversion of T4 to T3 in these cells. There's less T3 coming out of those cells to support the circulating levels. But other thing that happens is now we get to a point as we keep creeping that dose up that now there's so much T4 in the bloodstream that now deiodinase 1 starts to have to shift its responsibility from reverse T3 clearance and other thyroid metabolism to converting T4 to T3. Now, why would the body do that? We see this in hyperthyroidism. You know this from hyperthyroidism, right? This is what happens in hyperthyroidism. You get so much more deiodinase 1 activity. Why does that happen? I don't know if everybody agrees with it, but my theory is that T4 hangs around for 7 days the half-life is 7 days. And so if we have way too much T4 in the system for extended periods of time, we think of T4 as an inactive hormone, but T4 can bind to integrin receptors on cells and cause cell replication. And so is that good? Probably not, right? And so I think it's an adaptive response by the physiology to say, whoa, we've got too much T4 in the system. We need to get this stuff out of the system faster. So if we convert it to T3 more rapidly, what's the upside there? Half-life is 12 to 24 hours, 18 to 24 hours, depending on who you talk to. It's going to get metabolized much quicker out of the system. So that's my theory, is that that's probably why we get it. So we take T4, lower dose, it may help with some of the production, the level of T3, because now if we were totally deficient, we can't make T3. We can't make reverse T3. So as we add more T4, we can see the levels creep. And then what I'm always looking for is, okay, there's the creep up. Now we're seeing it go the other way. We're seeing reverse T3 go up and T3's plateauing or going down. We're probably at the appropriate dose for now. We don't want to go any higher than that, or maybe a little bit lower. But then if we did keep going up, as we keep going up at that point, now we're actually having the opposite effect, which I think happens to so many people, because I felt good, but now I feel tired and fatigued again. Okay, let's just give you more. Let's give you more. Let's give you more. And that's how people wind up on, crazy amounts of thyroid hormone, to almost sometimes double the amount of thyroid hormone that a thyroid gland would make.
Yeah, and oftentimes they don't feel better.
No.
They feel
Yeah.
worse. Yeah,
Right. And they get the mixed symptoms, right? So I've got hyper and hypothyroid symptoms, and they're told that that can't be, but in reality, it actually absolutely can be, and it
absolutely.
probably is what's going on.
I've felt it. Like I've
Yeah.
lived it, and
Mhm.
you articulate very well. I love functional medicine. This kind of stuff just really gears me up,
Mhm.
because if somebody comes to me with hypothyroidism and they have weight loss resistance and they're wanting, like, what do we do? Like this question is asking, it's looking everywhere, not just,
Mhm.
I mean, the gland, obviously it matters. It's vitally important for the body, but that's not the only place to look. There's so many variables. And you talked about inflammation. Yeah,
Mhm.
inflammation is very important to understand, to talk about, and
Mhm.
things that drive it. And weight gain is very frustrating, right?
Mhm.
It's everywhere, all over social media, the next person's perfect program to lose weight. And what I don't like about approaches like that is there's no personalization. It's not looking, it isn't one magical supplement, a magical diet plan, or magical dose of thyroid
Mhm.
hormone that's going to be a lasting factor for somebody's weight. There,
Mhm.
it's everything. It's the body. Our bodies are fantastic. All of
Yeah,
us, fantastic.
and I think we just get the wrong idea sometimes that if we just put enough fuel in there, it's going to work. And we've used this analogy, I think, on the other ones. Like, if your engine, you got bad spark plugs, lack of oil in the car, it doesn't matter how much gasoline you put in to fill that tank up, the car is still not going to run well. We've got to stop assuming that the chemistry is broken all the time, and instead look at thyroid hormone as the thermostat. Like, I up the cells, increase and decrease the amount of T3, right? To based on what's going on inside the cell, like the thermostat it up. Hey, it's cold in here. Right. All right. So let's turn the thermostat up, right? The other thing we need to do is ask the question, well, why is it cold in here? Right. And, oh, because the door's open. Okay. Well, this turning up the metabolism may help temporarily, but really the long-term solution is close the door. Right. But we just assume that everything is just, we just need more thyroid hormone that's going to do it. But there's so many other factors, as you said, that are creating a response that's causing the cells to adaptively change the metabolism because of what's going on at the cell. And I just don't think a lot of people in functional medicine truly believe that concept. And maybe it's a strange concept. We talk about it at one end, like we need to address root cause, but then at the same time, people are trying to optimize the thyroid medication. They're trying to optimize bioidentical hormones. Well, okay, wait a second here. If you're telling me we have to address root cause, then why are we forcing excessive amounts of sex hormones into somebody inappropriately? Well, because I'm trying to optimize them. Well, what are you trying to optimize? Right? Maybe their abnormal value is the optimal state for a person with a chronic infection or inflammation, right? Maybe it is the optimal state who has that chronic inflammatory response going on, has the adaptive decreased conversion of T4 to T3, and therefore there isn't enough T3 to generate sex hormones. And why might that be an appropriate response? Because if they're fighting a threat, you don't need sex hormones in that moment. What I need is to make inflammatory proteins to help fight off the threat. So I think even in functional medicine, sometimes we say this piece like we're identifying root causes, and yet our actions are allopathic.
I would argue that's not functional medicine at all.
Right.
That if that's essentially a supplement instead of a synthetic, a
Mm-hmm.
pill, instead of a script. And again, I prescribe medications, like actual pharmaceutical drugs, all the time. And I recommend lots of supplements depending on the circumstances, the situation, and everybody is different. But they're not going to be the magic that people think that they will be, because I have so many people. You brought up like sex hormones. My background is women's health. I'm turning 50 this year. I care very much about hormones for myself and everybody else. But the answer isn't just to shove it in, and then we're measuring the blood. So we don't know what the body's essentially doing with it. And then what other impacts is it likely to have downstream? And then we're shoving this in for that issue, this in for that issue, and somebody still doesn't feel well. And I don't like that approach. Just a lot of things get under my skin, but definitely that one, because I look at functional medicine as when I found functional medicine, it changed everything about my life. I thought my life was over. Like the conventional medicine model left me like, I don't think I've ever felt that bad. I would never want anybody to lose hope to the point where I didn't know if I was going to want to get out of bed. I was in such a deep depression and I felt terrible. And even before I lost, they took my thyroid, finding functional medicine to me, and I know I've mentioned this before and I talk about this all the time. I was like, what do I take? What do I take? What do I do? And I didn't get the answer, because there is no one answer.
Yeah.
There was, that would be great. Nobody would feel bad. There would be no disease. If there was just a simple answer for everything, there would be no issues. But it isn't that simple. But functional medicine, the true root cause medicine, can be absolutely life-changing. But it's going to start with everybody involved. So the practitioner and the individual, using this and this, like these things, they matter. And taking a broad approach, like looking for a reason, because then I found the reason. My root cause is mold. So I get on a protocol and then optimize my thyroid levels. But maybe they're still eating garbage like I used to, sweet tarts. You mentioned caffeine when you worked night shift. I didn't even have caffeine. Now I have caffeine, but I didn't really drink a lot of caffeine then. I just ate sugar all night long. I wasn't eating food. I'm like, oh, it's fat-free with red 40 and blue number 2. Of course, I wasn't thinking about that then. So essentially, it all matters. There's not a simple protocol for, here, take this dose, do this, and now you're going to magically lose weight. I wish it was that simple, but it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be hard. We have to be in it for the long run, for the long game. We have to be playing the long game.
Yeah. All right, let's try and get another one in there before we have to close this down.
How can I naturally support my thyroid function through diet? Are there specific foods I should include or avoid?
I'll give you the easy answer. Primarily eat whole food-based diet. That's the easy answer. The second part of that is there foods you should avoid? I would tell you, eliminate as much as possible highly processed foods from your diet. Limit the amount of alcohol, just limit processed foods. I mean, that's the easy answer. There is a discussion that if you have a thyroid condition, you shouldn't eat goitrogenic-based foods. I think we've talked about this numerous times in the podcast. That has not really been shown to be a problem. At one point, it was thought to be a problem, but the newer science says that that's really not what's creating problems. So super easy. Eat a whole food-based diet 70, 80, 90% of the time. Every once in a while, enjoy yourself, have some fun. That's my motto for a lot of things. And you're probably going to have a healthier body, healthier physiology, and healthier thyroid physiology.
Well, you spelled it all out right there, right? Whole foods. To me, that's the perfect plan, is how many whole foods can you consume? And I was actually yesterday with 2 different people. I take pictures of all my food. I'm one of those weird individuals. it inspires me, and I love color. And I was eating sweet tarts, Doritos, and garbage all the time. I grew up on that stuff, and I used to drink Cokes 10 a day. So I understand poor lifestyle because I lived it for so many years of my life, right? So I went from not even knowing what vegetables were, essentially. Like, I knew what they were, but I didn't eat them. And to what I eat now. So when I show my plate and they're like, well, what do you eat? You know, what dose are you on, Tara? You know, what do you eat? What are you doing? Because I used to weigh 75 pounds more than I do now for a period in my life. And I know how hard it is to lose weight. And if somebody's like, eat less, move more, that's terrible advice. Terrible advice as just a blanket generic statement, and you have no idea what that person is doing. Maybe somebody does need to do that, but maybe somebody doesn't. For me, I was overdoing it and I wasn't eating enough. Right. And so I find this question very interesting because, like you said about the goitrogens, and, you know, people asking about soy. Do I need to give up soy? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Does your body have an issue with soy? I definitely recommend organic for most things. And we've talked about this before also. I am very opinionated on gluten, but I don't necessarily believe everybody needs to stop eating gluten. But maybe, you know, is it something, do I go there? Maybe. I don't force anybody, because that's not possible to force anybody to do anything. And oftentimes I don't start by recommending. I want to know, what are they doing? Like, if we're going to do short-term tracking, unless there's a history of eating disorders or any kind of trigger for them with tracking, I like to really visualize, like, because I want to know the nutrients. Like, are you getting essential nutrients? So for thyroid function, I'm always, for the body, not just thyroid function, I'm going to think about, what nutrients are you getting? Because what nutrients was I getting in sweet tarts? Nothing. Essentially nothing, right? I was getting chemicals and sugar, fake,
Aren't they fortified? Aren't they fortified with nutrients? No.
You know what? I haven't seen sweet tarts. We're not friends anymore.
There's nothing on there that says loaded with B vitamins or B-like vitamins or something. I don't know.
It probably does. So yeah, I usually recommend if somebody is willing to consider reducing ultra processed foods. So like I love SMART goals, working on SMART goals with people. So it isn't, I'm never going to do this again, because what is going to happen when you go to that birthday party, or it's your anniversary, or you're on a cruise or whatever, and then you're very stressed out saying, I can't have this. Is that going to be optimal for your body?
Right. No. Or they're walking around with the guilt of what they did. And that's not healthy either. So, you know, I think we simplify the whole thing down. Should I eat soy? I don't know. Do you eat soy like naturally, or are you eating like tofu? Like, what are you eating?
Dogs,
right. Should I eat wheat? I don't know. Is that a whole food? Do you just chew on a thing of wheat? Like, or no, I have to make it into, you probably don't want to do that very often, right? So I think if we just keep this super simple, focus on a whole food based diet. Well, what about vegan? Well, what about carnivore? Is it whole food based? Well, yeah. Okay. See how you do on it, right? Like, I don't know. Oh, well, it's vegan. Okay. Well, is it whole food vegan, or is it processed food vegan? Well, mostly processed. Well, probably not good, right? Are you doing I'm doing carnivore. Okay. Are you eating whole food carnivore, or are you eating a whole bunch of processed, packaged, meat-like foods? Like, most of it's processed. Okay. Well, then let's not do that. Well, what about ground beef? Can I have ground beef? Yeah. Ground beef's probably awesome. You know that you could, there's tons of collagen in there. There's stuff. It's not unhealthy for you. It's just taking a big piece of meat and grinding it up. Why would that be any more unhealthy necessarily than the filet, right? Matter of fact, there's probably less collagen in the ground up in that filet than there is in the ground up meat, because it's got the tendons and all the other things in it. So I think for most people, whether they want to do like AIP or they want to do vegetarian, Mediterranean, whatever, just keep it so simple. Like, am I eating a whole food based meal, 80, 90% of the time? Yes. Hey, it's awesome.
And then working up to that point, because lifestyle changes are, I know they're difficult. They're easy, but they're difficult. They're usually free to make a change. Even if somebody's going from ultra processed to whole foods, it depends on what somebody's buying. It doesn't have to be really complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. Somebody doesn't have to go from they don't cook or prepare any foods themselves to now they're in the kitchen cooking all these meals every single day. And like, what is the exact meal plan for me? It depends, but easing in, like, again, with the SMART goals, I have somebody right now. I asked, what's her goal for 3 months from now with us working together? What does she envision? What is a healthy, this individual, what does she see? And she said she wants to feel better. She wants to have energy. She wants to not be short-tempered with her kids, right? So this is great. And I said, well, how can we what are some ways in which we can get there? And she identified she eats a lot of really processed foods. So she said, well, what does this look like? What should I do? So I just cut it all out completely tomorrow. I said, well, you can, but where do we have a barrier? Like, what time of day are you the most stressed out? What time of day are you consuming the most packaged foods? Can we start there? And can we throw you a rope? Not to hang yourself, but to get out of the hole. If one day you get home and I should be eating these carrots, they're here, but I'm choosing to eat these, whatever, let's call it sweet tarts and stick with that. And now I've ruined it. And now I've ruined my goal. I've ruined any chance for success. And then we have that defeated mindset, and we're on this like hamster wheel, this cycle that's horrible. I lived on that cycle for years and wondered why I couldn't get off of it, right? Why I wasn't getting any better, why I felt terrible, and why I wasn't losing any weight at that period of time. This is in my opinion, the most important part of any plan. If we don't believe it, if we come into something like a suggestion or working with you or working with me or somebody like us, and we already know what we want, like we're not doing this, or we just want the magic answer and we're not looking at the whole picture and how are we participating? Because I don't have that kind of power to wave a wand over somebody and they're healed. I don't have that. Even no matter what medication I give them or meal plan that I put them on, they are the only one who possess that power. And it starts here. And I always do this because our mind has to be in it, but our heart has to be in it. That's why I always talk about a solid why we're doing it. So are we losing weight just because we're looking at photos of people that are unrealistic and touched up on social media and we think we need to look like that? Are we losing weight because our pants don't fit? Or like we want more energy because our health is declining and we've come down with some chronic diseases. We caught a couple of those. Then what are we willing to do? And that's, for me, that's one of the most important questions. And I ask, and a lot of times there's dead silence. When I ask that, they're like, well, what do you mean? That's what you're here for, to tell me what to do. I'm like, no, it isn't. That model doesn't work because they're not broken. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a tough transition for some people, just like transitioning their diet, but transitioning their mindset as to what healthcare is from what they grew up in. We grew up in the model that the healthcare is going to your doctor and getting a prescription for whatever they find, versus healthcare is having a high level of fitness in a number of different aspects, great sleep, great breathing habits, plenty of physical strength and exercise and resiliency. But most people don't really, I don't think, really have a clear picture if they came from, grew up like most of us in traditional allopathic medicine for what the job of the healthcare practitioner is. It's like, okay, I come here, I tell you what's wrong, you give me something. And that may be true for allopathic medicine, but functional medicine is, I come to you, I have this going on. You've been taught that we're going to give you something, but more often what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we don't need to give you anything. Many times we need to take things away. And what we need to do instead is get you to change some of the things that you're currently doing that aren't contributing to a higher state of health and replace those with healthier habits and healthier behaviors. And that's really ultimately what helps people get well. It's not necessarily the things we give them. It's the things we convince them that they need to do for themselves that are better than the things they were already doing. And that's how they're going to get increased health and well-being and need less things given to them, because they've chosen to do more of the things that are going to promote health and less of the things that are going to diminish their health. So I think we can wrap it up. Clock right on the button. Awesome. That was perfect timing. So Tara, thanks again for coming on. I'm guessing we've got enough for another month. So for anybody who's listening to this episode of the Thyroid Answers podcast, if you like the Q&As, you can you can reach out to me at office@rejuvagencenter.com. You can put comments below wherever you watch the videos, and you can send comments and questions to Tara, especially if you're following her podcast as well. And we'll try and cover those on future episodes. And we'll keep going, I guess, until either Tara gets sick of talking to me or listening to me, or we run out of questions, which hasn't happened yet. So Tara, tell everybody where you're at and how they can hear more about you, and then we'll sign off.
The best place is my website, thefunctionalnursepractitioner.com, and it's the same on Facebook, Instagram. That's the best way to reach me. I live in the state of Indiana. So if somebody's looking for me to manage their care as a practitioner, they need to live in the state I live in, or I can work with them through like nutrition and wellness coaching anywhere.
Awesome. All right, we're going to wrap it up. If you like this, like I said, go to send us some more questions, send us some comments, and give us a review on wherever you download your podcasts. I think 5 is the best one, if I remember correctly. So I would choose 5. That's just me and my personal opinion. So anyway, Tara, take care. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk next month.
Thanks, Eric. You too.
You see. Take care.